When King George VI died in 1952, the world mourned a quiet monarch who never expected to rule. But what became of his two daughters, the little girls once known simply as Lilibet and Margaret? One would shoulder the weight of empire for 70 years, the other would test the limits of royal duty and personal freedom. This is not a story of crowns and scandals, but of how two sisters shaped the modern British monarchy, and how, decades after their father's death, their legacies still define the House of Windsor today. From wartime bunkers to global jubilees, from Glamis Castle to Buckingham Palace, let's trace the full journeys of King George VI's children and discover whatever happened to them. This documentary follows two chapters, the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II and the parallel story of Princess Margaret. Together, these accounts reveal how one royal family transformed from reluctant monarchs into the foundation of Britain's modern constitutional system. On April 21, 1926, at 17 Bruton Street in London's fashionable Mayfair district, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor entered a world that never expected her to rule. Her father, Albert Frederick Arthur George, was then the Duke of York, a second son who stammered, content to remain in his elder brother's shadow. Her mother, formerly Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, had married into royalty but anticipated a life of comfortable obscurity. The birth registration listed the infant as Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth of York, third in line to the throne behind her uncle David, the Prince of Wales, and her father. No one imagined this sleeping child would one day become the longest reigning British monarch in history. The York family established their residence at 145 Piccadilly, creating what the Duke would later describe as We Four, a tight domestic unit that prioritized privacy and normalcy within the constraints of royal protocol. The Duke of York had inherited his father, King George V's sense of duty, but also his preference for family life over ceremonial grandeur. This atmosphere would prove formative for both daughters, establishing patterns of discretion and dedication that would define their adult lives. Elizabeth's early years unfolded against the backdrop of post-war Britain's recovery and the monarchy's gradual modernization under King George V. The little princess learned to walk in the corridors of a house that looked onto Hyde Park, unaware that constitutional crisis would soon reshape her destiny entirely. The education of Princess Elizabeth reflected the royal family's cautious approach to modernity. Rather than attending school, she received instruction at home under the guidance of Marion Crawford, a Scottish governess who would later chronicle these years in controversial detail. Crawford, known to the family as Crawfie, implemented a curriculum emphasizing history, languages, literature, and constitutional law, subjects deemed appropriate for a princess who might one day represent the crown. Elizabeth's relationship with her younger sister Margaret, born in 1930, established a dynamic that would persist throughout their lives. Elizabeth, methodical and conscientious, balanced Margaret's more spontaneous and artistic temperament. The sisters shared lessons, but their approaches differed markedly. Where Elizabeth absorbed constitutional history with genuine interest, Margaret excelled in music and performance. Their grandfather, King George V, took particular interest in Elizabeth's development, recognizing in her the same steady disposition that had served him well during the tumultuous years of World War I and its aftermath. He encouraged her sense of duty, while ensuring she understood the weight of royal responsibility. These early lessons in statecraft, delivered during walks through the gardens at Windsor Castle, would prove invaluable in later decades. The family's routine centered on seasonal movements between London and the royal estates. Summers at Balmoral introduced Elizabeth to Scotland and the outdoor pursuits that would become lifelong passions. Winters at Sandringham provided opportunities for more formal education in protocol and precedence. Throughout these movements, the young princess observed the machinery of monarchy without yet understanding her likely role within it. This carefully structured childhood emphasized moral development alongside academic achievement. Both parents insisted on punctuality, honesty, and service to others. Elizabeth learned to perform small charitable acts and public duties, developing the sense of obligation that would later characterize her approach to queenship. The abdication crisis of 1936 shattered this protected world entirely. On December 11, 1936, King Edward VIII's radio broadcast announcing his abdication transformed 10-year-old Elizabeth's life irrevocably. Her uncle's decision to renounce the throne for the woman I love elevated her stammering father to King George VI and positioned her as heir presumptive to the British crown. The family's move from 145 Piccadilly to Buckingham Palace represented more than a change of address. It signaled their acceptance of a destiny none had sought. The new King George VI, thrust into a role he had never wanted, determined to prepare his elder daughter for the responsibilities that would likely fall to her. This preparation intensified during the late 1930s as war clouds gathered over Europe. Elizabeth's education expanded to include more rigorous constitutional instruction. She began studying the history of parliamentary democracy, the Commonwealth system, and the delicate balance between royal prerogative and democratic governance. Her tutors emphasized that constitutional monarchy required not just ceremonial grace, but also deep understanding of political processes and social change. The princess also began participating in carefully selected public engagements, learning to navigate the protocols of royal duty. These early appearances established patterns that would persist throughout her reign: punctuality, genuine interest in others, and an ability to represent stability during uncertain times. By 1939, as Britain prepared for war, 13-year-old Elizabeth had already begun to embody the qualities her father valued most: steadiness, discretion, and an unwavering commitment to service above self. These characteristics would soon be tested by the greatest crisis of her generation. The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 posed immediate questions about the safety of the royal family. While many aristocratic families sent their children to safety in Canada or the United States, Queen Elizabeth famously declared that the children won't leave without me, I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave. This decision kept Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret at Windsor Castle throughout the war years, sharing the dangers and privations of their subjects. Windsor Castle, reinforced against bombing and equipped with underground shelters, became the sisters' wartime home. Elizabeth's education continued under modified circumstances, with increased emphasis on contemporary history and international relations. She followed war developments closely, understanding that the conflict would reshape the world she would eventually help govern. In October 1940, 14-year-old Elizabeth made her first radio broadcast addressing children who had been evacuated from British cities. Speaking from Windsor Castle, she demonstrated the calm, reassuring presence that would characterize her public persona for decades. The broadcast, heard throughout the Commonwealth, established her as a symbol of continuity and hope during Britain's darkest hour. As she matured during the war years, Elizabeth expressed desire to contribute more directly to the war effort. In 1945, aged 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service as Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor, training as a driver and mechanic at Aldershot. This service, though brief and carefully managed, represented genuine participation in the national struggle. The princess learned to drive and maintain military vehicles, change tires, and perform basic mechanical repairs. Photographs of her in uniform, hands dirty from engine work, conveyed powerful messages about royal solidarity with ordinary citizens. Though she lived at Windsor rather than in barracks, her service demonstrated that royalty could share common burdens during national crisis. Her wartime experiences shaped Elizabeth's understanding of leadership during difficulty. She witnessed her father's growth into an effective wartime monarch, observed her mother's morale-boosting visits to bombed areas, and learned that constitutional monarchy required active engagement with national challenges rather than mere ceremonial presence. The war's end in 1945 coincided with Elizabeth's entry into adult royal responsibilities and her deepening relationship with Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Their courtship had begun during the war years when Philip, serving in the Royal Navy, visited Windsor Castle. Despite initial reservations from some courtiers about his foreign birth and unconventional background, the relationship gradually gained family approval. Their engagement, announced in July 1947, represented both personal happiness and constitutional significance. Philip renounced his Greek titles, adopted the surname Mountbatten, and became a British subject. The wedding, held at Westminster Abbey on November 20, 1947, provided Britain with a celebration of hope and renewal after years of wartime austerity. The ceremony, broadcast by BBC Radio to 200 million listeners worldwide, demonstrated the monarchy's potential for inspiring joy and unity. Elizabeth's wedding dress, designed by Norman Hartnell, required clothing coupons like any other bride's outfit, emphasizing shared sacrifice while maintaining royal dignity. Their early married life at Clarence House reflected attempts to balance royal duty with domestic normalcy. Prince Charles was born in 1948, followed by Princess Anne in 1950. Elizabeth strove to be personally involved in her children's upbringing while fulfilling increasing public responsibilities as her father's health declined. The young family's time at Clarence House represented a brief interlude of relative privacy. Philip continued his naval career while Elizabeth undertook Commonwealth tours and ceremonial duties. Their partnership established patterns of mutual support that would prove essential during the demanding decades ahead. However, this domestic tranquility was interrupted by King George VI's declining health and the growing recognition that Elizabeth's succession might come sooner than anticipated. King George VI died peacefully in his sleep at Sandringham on February 6, 1952. 25-year-old Elizabeth learned of her father's death while staying at Treetops Hotel in Kenya during a Commonwealth tour. She returned to London as Queen Elizabeth II, beginning a reign that would span 7 decades and transform the British monarchy. The transition occurred smoothly, demonstrating the constitutional system's stability. Elizabeth's first acts as queen emphasized continuity with her father's reign while acknowledging the need for generational change. She retained Winston Churchill as prime minister and confirmed existing governmental arrangements, but also signaled openness to modernizing royal practices. Preparation for the coronation dominated 1952 and early 1953. The ceremony, held at Westminster Abbey on June 2, 1953, represented a masterpiece of tradition and innovation. For the first time in history, a British coronation was televised, allowing millions worldwide to witness the ancient ritual. This decision, initially controversial among conservatives who feared diminishing royal mystique, proved transformative in establishing the Queen's relationship with her subjects. The coronation's global audience exceeded 300 million viewers, demonstrating television's power to unite the Commonwealth and strengthen emotional bonds between crown and people. Elizabeth's dignity throughout the lengthy ceremony, her evident understanding of its religious significance, and her graceful handling of complex protocols established her credibility as a constitutional monarch capable of serving effectively for decades. Her early Commonwealth tours reinforced this positive impression. Extended visits to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and other realms demonstrated personal commitment to the Commonwealth relationship and adaptability to diverse cultural contexts. These journeys, often lasting several months, required physical stamina, diplomatic skill, and genuine interest in local conditions. The Queen's approach to constitutional questions during her early reign established precedents that would guide her throughout her long tenure. She scrupulously maintained political neutrality, consulted broadly on difficult questions, and consistently placed institutional stability above personal preference. This approach earned respect across party lines and reinforced constitutional monarchy's viability in the democratic age. The 1960s and 1970s tested the monarchy's relevance amid rapid social change. Britain's transformation from imperial power to European nation, the rise of youth culture, and questioning of traditional authority structures created challenges that required careful navigation. Elizabeth II responded by gradually modernizing royal practices while preserving essential constitutional functions. The first walkabout, undertaken during a 1970 visit to Australia and New Zealand, revolutionized royal public engagements by allowing direct contact between sovereign and subjects. This innovation, initially viewed skeptically by palace officials, proved enormously popular and became standard practice. Television played an increasingly important role in royal communication. The 1969 documentary Royal Family provided unprecedented glimpses of the Queen's private life, showing her as wife, mother, and individual rather than merely ceremonial figure. Though later withdrawn from circulation, the film demonstrated willingness to adapt royal publicity to contemporary media expectations. The Commonwealth's evolution from empire to voluntary association required delicate handling of decolonization processes. The Queen's role in these transitions proved crucial, providing symbolic continuity while acknowledging political realities. Her relationships with Commonwealth leaders, from Kwame Nkrumah to Nelson Mandela, demonstrated personal diplomacy's continued relevance in international relations. Family challenges during these decades tested the monarchy's public standing. The breakdown of Princess Margaret's marriage, Lord Snowdon's unconventional behavior, and increasing press scrutiny of royal private lives created new pressures. The Queen's response emphasized duty over publicity, maintaining dignity while allowing family members to navigate personal difficulties with appropriate discretion. Economic challenges of the 1970s affected the monarchy directly. Rising inflation increased royal household costs while public spending faced scrutiny. The Queen agreed to pay income tax voluntarily and undertook comprehensive reviews of royal finances, demonstrating responsiveness to public concerns about royal privilege during difficult economic times. The Silver Jubilee of 1977 marked a turning point in public perception of Elizabeth II's reign. Initial uncertainty about public enthusiasm gave way to nationwide celebration, demonstrating enduring affection for the Queen personally and the institution she represented. The Jubilee Year's events revealed the monarchy's capacity to inspire national unity during divisive times. Street parties, community celebrations, and regional festivities crossed social and political boundaries, suggesting that constitutional monarchy retained relevance despite social change. The Queen's tour of Britain during Jubilee Year allowed direct contact with millions of subjects, reinforcing personal bonds that transcended constitutional theory. Commonwealth Jubilee celebrations demonstrated the Queen's continuing role in maintaining relationships among diverse nations. Her visits to Commonwealth realms during 1977 strengthened ties while acknowledging each nation's sovereignty and distinct identity. This delicate balance between unity and diversity would characterize her approach to Commonwealth relations throughout her reign. The Golden Jubilee of 2002, despite coinciding with Princess Margaret's death and the Queen Mother's passing, again demonstrated public affection and constitutional stability. The Diamond Jubilee of 2012 and Platinum Jubilee of 2022 continued this pattern, each celebration marking not merely longevity but successful adaptation to changing circumstances. These jubilees served multiple functions beyond celebration. They provided opportunities for national reflection, community building, and international diplomacy. They also demonstrated the Queen's personal commitment to service and her subjects' recognition of that dedication. The 21st century brought new challenges and personal losses that tested the Queen's resilience. The death of Princess Margaret in February 2002, followed by the Queen Mother's passing in March, marked the end of an era. These losses, occurring during Golden Jubilee year, required the Queen to balance personal grief with public celebration. The Windsor Castle fire of 1992, dubbed the Queen's annus horribilis, had earlier demonstrated her ability to maintain perspective during difficult times. The fire's destruction of historical treasures paralleled personal challenges within the royal family, including marital breakdowns and negative publicity. The Queen's response emphasized restoration over recrimination, focusing on preserving historical heritage while acknowledging the need for change. Prince Philip's retirement from public duties in 2017, after decades of supporting the Queen's work, marked another significant transition. Their partnership, spanning 7 decades of marriage, had provided stability and continuity throughout changing times. Philip's death in April 2021, during COVID-19 restrictions, required the Queen to mourn privately while maintaining public duties. The pandemic years of 2020 to 2022 showcased the Queen's continued relevance during national crisis. Her broadcasts during lockdown periods provided reassurance and unity, echoing her wartime radio addresses decades earlier. Her ability to adapt royal duties to health restrictions demonstrated flexibility while maintaining constitutional functions. Her final public appearance, greeting new Prime Minister Liz Truss at Balmoral on September 6, 2022, exemplified her commitment to constitutional duty until the end. 2 days later, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully at Balmoral Castle, surrounded by family. The Queen's death at age 96 concluded the longest reign in British history and triggered the most comprehensive state funeral arrangements in modern times. The period between her death and funeral on September 19, 2022, demonstrated the monarchy's continuing capacity to unite the nation and Commonwealth during times of transition. The lying in state at Westminster Hall attracted hundreds of thousands of mourners representing every social class, age group, and background. This massive popular response contradicted predictions about declining royal relevance, suggesting that the Queen's personal dedication had transcended institutional criticism. The state funeral at Westminster Abbey, attended by world leaders and broadcast globally, provided a fitting conclusion to a reign characterized by duty, dignity, and service. The ceremony balanced ancient tradition with contemporary elements, reflecting the Queen's own approach to constitutional monarchy throughout 7 decades. International reaction to the Queen's death demonstrated her global significance beyond the Commonwealth realms. Tributes from presidents, prime ministers, and ordinary citizens worldwide acknowledged her role in promoting international understanding, democratic values, and peaceful change. The transition to King Charles III proceeded smoothly, confirming the constitutional system's stability and the Queen's success in preparing her heir for succession. Her death marked not just the end of an era, but validation of constitutional monarchy's continuing viability in democratic societies. Queen Elizabeth II's legacy extends far beyond her record-breaking reign length. She transformed constitutional monarchy from an anachronistic survival into a functioning element of modern democratic governance. Her approach to political neutrality, public service, and institutional preservation provided a model for constitutional monarchs worldwide. King Charles III inherited not just the crown, but also the methods and principles his mother had developed over 7 decades. His accession speech emphasized continuity with her approach while acknowledging different challenges and opportunities. The succession demonstrated that personal dedication and institutional wisdom can indeed be transmitted across generations. The Queen's descendants now span 4 generations, from her children to her great-grandchildren. Each represents different approaches to royal duty, reflecting changing social expectations and personal circumstances. However, all were influenced by her example of putting service above self-interest. Her 4 children pursued varied paths within royal frameworks. King Charles III developed expertise in environmental issues, architecture, and social problems. Princess Anne became renowned for equestrian achievements and charitable work. Prince Andrew served in the Royal Navy and later faced personal controversies. Prince Edward focused on arts patronage and ceremonial duties. The Queen's grandchildren, including Prince William and Prince Harry, grew up understanding both royal privilege and public responsibility. Their experiences reflected changing media environments, social expectations, and generational attitudes toward tradition and duty. Queen Elizabeth II's approach to constitutional monarchy emphasized adaptation without abandoning essential principles. She demonstrated that traditional institutions could remain relevant by serving genuine public purposes rather than merely preserving historical forms. This lesson extends beyond monarchy to other institutions seeking to maintain legitimacy during periods of rapid change. Her reign spanned from the aftermath of World War II to the digital age, from Imperial Britain to Brexit, from deference culture to social media scrutiny. Throughout these transformations, she maintained consistency of purpose while adapting methods to changing circumstances. This balance between continuity and change represents her most significant contribution to constitutional theory and practice. The global response to her death confirmed that personal dedication to public service retains meaning in an increasingly cynical age. Her example suggests that leadership based on duty rather than ambition can earn lasting respect across political, cultural, and generational boundaries. From the little girl known as Lilibet to the global icon mourned worldwide, Queen Elizabeth II fulfilled and exceeded the expectations created by her father's sense of duty. She transformed King George VI's reluctant acceptance of royal responsibility into a lifelong demonstration of service's continuing relevance in democratic societies. Princess Margaret Rose was born on August 21, 1930, at Glamis Castle in Scotland, the ancestral home of her mother's family, the Beauce-Lyons. Unlike her sister Elizabeth's birth in London's medical facilities, Margaret's arrival in this ancient Scottish castle seemed to foreshadow a life that would often blend tradition with unconventionality. From birth, Margaret occupied a unique position within the royal family structure. As the younger daughter of a second son, she was initially fourth in line to the throne, with little expectation of major constitutional responsibilities. This relative freedom from succession pressures allowed her parents to approach her upbringing with less formality than Elizabeth's carefully structured education, though both girls received similar instruction in the fundamentals of royal duty. The contrast between the sisters emerged early. Where Elizabeth displayed the methodical temperament that would serve her well as a constitutional monarch, Margaret demonstrated artistic flair, quick wit, and a more emotional approach to life's challenges. Their mother, later Queen Elizabeth, recognized these differences and encouraged Margaret's creative interest while maintaining the discipline expected of royal children. Margaret's early years at 145 Piccadilly were shaped by the same us-four family dynamic that influenced Elizabeth, but her position as the younger sister created different expectations and opportunities. She was less burdened by constitutional instruction and more encouraged in musical and theatrical pursuits, displaying considerable talent in both areas from an early age. The nursery at 145 Piccadilly became a stage for Margaret's performances, with family members serving as an appreciative audience for her songs, dances, and dramatic presentations. These early experiences fostered confidence in public performance that would prove both advantageous and problematic in later life, as Margaret struggled to balance genuine artistic abilities with appropriate royal behavior. The abdication crisis of 1936 affected Margaret differently than Elizabeth. While her elder sister suddenly became heir presumptive with all the accompanying responsibilities, Margaret's position changed less dramatically. She remained the younger daughter, though now of a reigning monarch rather than a duke. This distinction would shape her entire adult life as she navigated the expectations of royal duty without the clear purpose that characterized Elizabeth's existence. Margaret's education paralleled Elizabeth's in structure but differed significantly in emphasis. Both sisters studied under Marion Crawford's guidance, but Margaret's curriculum placed greater emphasis on arts, languages, and cultural subjects. She demonstrated particular talent in music, becoming an accomplished pianist and developing a sophisticated understanding of classical and contemporary compositions. The move to Buckingham Palace following their father's accession expanded Margaret's educational opportunities. She received instruction in European languages, art history, and literature, subjects deemed appropriate for a princess who might represent the crown in cultural contexts. Her quick intelligence and retentive memory impressed tutors, though her attention sometimes wandered from constitutional law and political history. During World War II, Margaret's experience at Windsor Castle paralleled Elizabeth's, but reflected their different personalities and positions. While Elizabeth focused on understanding wartime leadership and preparing for eventual constitutional responsibilities, Margaret threw herself into entertainment activities designed to boost morale among castle staff and visiting dignitaries. The princess organized amateur theatrical productions featuring herself and Elizabeth, wrote and performed songs, and demonstrated remarkable ability to lift spirits during difficult periods. These activities revealed Margaret's genuine talent and her instinctive understanding of entertainment's therapeutic value during wartime stress. Her famous performance of charades at Windsor Castle, where she often played multiple characters with remarkable versatility, became legendary among those who witnessed them. These performances suggested that Margaret possessed natural theatrical gifts that under different circumstances might have led to professional accomplishment. Unlike Elizabeth, who joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, Margaret was considered too young for formal wartime service. However, she participated in various morale-boosting activities, including radio broadcasts and appearances at war-related events. These experiences introduced her to public life while allowing expression of her more spontaneous and emotionally engaging personality. The wartime years also witnessed Margaret's growing awareness of her unique position within the royal family. She observed Elizabeth's preparation for eventual queenship while recognizing that her own future remained undefined. This uncertainty about her ultimate role would influence many of her subsequent choices and challenges. The war's end in 1945 brought Margaret, now 14, into increased public prominence as the royal family resumed normal ceremonial and social activities. Her first major public appearance came during the Victory in Europe celebrations, where her visible joy and natural grace caught media attention and began establishing her public persona. Margaret's approach to royal duties differed markedly from Elizabeth's methodical professionalism. Where her sister treated public engagements as constitutional obligations requiring careful preparation and consistent demeanor, Margaret brought spontaneity, emotional warmth, and genuine enthusiasm that often overshadowed more formal aspects of royal protocol. Her first solo engagement opening a hospital wing at age 16 demonstrated both her natural gifts and potential challenges. Margaret's genuine interest in patients, her ability to remember names and details from brief conversations, and her infectious enthusiasm created positive impressions that exceeded expectations. However, her tendency to extend conversations beyond scheduled timeframes and her emotional responses to individual stories suggested future difficulties with rigid royal scheduling. The princess's involvement in arts patronage began during these early post-war years. Her genuine expertise in music and theater, combined with natural performance abilities, made her an effective advocate for cultural organizations. Unlike purely ceremonial involvement, Margaret's artistic interests represented authentic personal engagement that enhanced her credibility in these areas. Media coverage of Margaret during the late 1940s established patterns that would persist throughout her life. Journalists recognized her natural quotability, her willingness to express opinions on topics beyond conventional royal subjects, and her more accessible personality compared to Elizabeth's formal correctness. This coverage, initially favorable, would later become problematic as Margaret's private life attracted increasing scrutiny. Her participation in Commonwealth tours during this period provided opportunities to observe international diplomacy while developing her own approach to representing the crown abroad. Margaret's success in these contexts stemmed from her ability to engage personally with diverse audiences while maintaining appropriate dignity and respect for local customs. The most defining episode of Margaret's early adult life began innocuously with her developing friendship with Group Captain Peter Townsend, her father's equerry. Townsend, a decorated Royal Air Force officer who had served with distinction during World War II, joined the royal household in 1944 and quickly earned the family's respect and affection. Initially, Townsend's relationship with the royal family appeared entirely appropriate. He accompanied them on official engagements, provided military expertise on ceremonial matters, and demonstrated the discretion and loyalty expected of senior household members. His war record, personal charm, and evident dedication to royal service made him a trusted confidant during King George VI's final years. Margaret's romantic interest in Townsend developed gradually during the early 1950s, initially obscured by the grief following her father's death and Elizabeth's accession. The relationship became public knowledge in 1953 when Margaret's gesture of removing lint from Townsend's uniform during Elizabeth's coronation was observed and interpreted by alert journalists. The constitutional implications of Margaret's romantic attachment to a divorced man created unprecedented challenges for the newly established Elizabethan reign. Under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, Margaret required the sovereign's consent for marriage before age 25. Additionally, as a member of the Church of England's royal family, marriage to a divorced person raised religious and political questions that had contributed to the abdication crisis 17 years earlier. Townsend's divorce, though granted on grounds of his wife's adultery, nonetheless placed him in a category that church doctrine and social convention of the 1950s considered inappropriate for royal marriage. The situation was further complicated by Townsend's position as a servant of the crown, raising questions about propriety and potential exploitation of his household access. The government's response, orchestrated by Prime Minister Winston Churchill and reinforced by Commonwealth prime ministers, established clear parameters for resolving the crisis. Margaret could marry Townsend only by renouncing her succession rights and potentially her royal status, similar to Edward VIII's abdication. Alternatively, she could wait until age 25 and marry without sovereign consent, though this might still require renouncing succession rights. The 2-year waiting period that followed, with Townsend transferred to Brussels and Margaret continuing royal duties while publicly uncommitted, created intense media speculation and public interest. This scrutiny transformed Margaret from a relatively minor royal figure into an international celebrity, establishing precedents for media coverage of royal private lives that would affect subsequent generations. The crisis's resolution came on October 31, 1955, when Margaret issued a statement announcing her decision not to marry Townsend. Her words, crafted with constitutional precision, emphasized duty over personal desire. "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. Mindful of the Church's teachings that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before others." This decision established Margaret's reputation for placing constitutional duty above personal happiness, but it also created lasting public sympathy and media interest in her romantic life. The sacrifice she had made for constitutional propriety earned respect, but also contributed to subsequent scrutiny of her relationships and lifestyle choices. Following the Townsend affair's conclusion, Margaret gradually returned to normal royal duties while rebuilding her private life. Her social circle expanded to include artists, writers, photographers, and other creative individuals who appreciated her intelligence and cultural interests. This bohemian group, centered around London's arts scene, provided Margaret with intellectual stimulation and emotional support during the adjustment period following her romantic sacrifice. Among these new acquaintances was Anthony Armstrong Jones, a photographer whose professional success and artistic talent matched Margaret's own creative interests. Armstrong Jones, later Lord Snowdon, represented a new type of royal consort, professional, creative, and socially unconventional, while possessing the charm and adaptability necessary for royal life. Their relationship developed during 1958 and 1959, initially conducted with discretion that reflected lessons learned from the Townsend affair. Armstrong Jones's profession provided natural explanations for their meetings, while his social connections offered camouflage for their developing romance. The relationship represented Margaret's attempt to combine personal happiness with constitutional propriety. The engagement, announced in February 1960, surprised the public and media, who had continued speculating about Margaret's romantic future. Armstrong Jones's selection demonstrated Margaret's independence while satisfying constitutional requirements. Unlike Townsend, he was unmarried, Anglican, and possessed sufficient social standing for royal marriage. Their wedding on May 6, 1960, at Westminster Abbey became the first royal wedding broadcast live on television, attracting global audiences estimated at 300 million viewers. The ceremony combined traditional royal pageantry with contemporary elements reflecting the couple's artistic sensibilities and the changing social climate of the early 1960s. The marriage's early years appeared successful, with the couple establishing a London social life that bridged royal duty and creative pursuits. Armstrong Jones, now Earl of Snowdon, developed his own royal role while maintaining professional photography interests. Their London home became a gathering place for artists, intellectuals, and cultural figures who previously had little contact with royalty. Their children, David Lindley, born in 1961, and Sarah Armstrong Jones, born in 1964, provided Margaret with maternal fulfillment while creating new challenges in balancing royal duties with family responsibilities. Unlike Elizabeth, whose children were born into clear succession roles, Margaret's offspring occupied ambiguous positions within royal hierarchy, belonging to aristocratic rather than specifically royal families. However, the marriage gradually faced difficulties stemming from incompatible personalities, professional pressures, and the unique stresses of royal life. Snowdon's artistic temperament and professional ambitions sometimes conflicted with royal protocols and Margaret's constitutional obligations. Their social life, initially exciting and stimulating, became a source of media criticism as reports of excessive partying and unconventional behavior attracted negative publicity. The breakdown accelerated during the 1970s as both partners pursued separate interests and relationships. Snowdon's career required extensive travel, while Margaret's royal duties demanded presence at ceremonial events he found tedious. Their separations, initially professional, became personal as each developed relationships with other individuals. The divorce, finalized in 1978, marked the first dissolution of a senior royal marriage since Henry VIII's era. Margaret's status as the Queen's sister ensured significant media attention, while the proceedings' relatively amicable nature reflected both parties' desire to minimize constitutional complications and protect their children's privacy. Despite personal difficulties, Margaret maintained active involvement in royal duties and charitable patronages throughout her adult life. Her particular interest in arts organizations reflected genuine expertise and personal commitment rather than merely ceremonial involvement. She served as president of the Royal Ballet, a role that combined her lifelong love of dance with practical support for British cultural institutions. Margaret's approach to charitable work emphasized personal engagement and hands-on involvement. Unlike some royal patrons who limited participation to formal ceremonies, she attended rehearsals, met with artists privately, and used her connections to advance causes she supported. This dedication earned respect within cultural communities and demonstrated her understanding of effective patronage. Her international travels as a representative of the Crown showcased her diplomatic abilities and cultural sensitivity. Margaret's success in these roles stemmed from genuine interest in meeting diverse people and understanding different perspectives, qualities that made her an effective royal ambassador, despite occasional protocol breaches. However, Margaret's later years were increasingly affected by health problems, largely attributed to her heavy smoking and lifestyle choices. The habit, begun during adolescence and continued despite medical advice, contributed to respiratory problems, strokes, and circulatory issues that gradually limited her public activities. Her first stroke in 1998 marked the beginning of a decline that saw Margaret withdraw progressively from public life. Subsequent strokes in 2001 affected her mobility and speech, requiring extensive care and limiting her ability to fulfill royal duties. The contrast between her earlier vitality and later frailty became a source of public sympathy and media reflection on the costs of royal celebrity. Margaret's relationship with her sister Elizabeth remained close throughout these difficulties, with the Queen providing both personal support and practical assistance in managing Margaret's reduced circumstances. Their bond, tested by various crises over the decades, demonstrated the enduring strength of family ties despite constitutional pressures and media scrutiny. The princess's withdrawal from public life during her final years allowed retrospective assessment of her contributions to royal duty and British cultural life. Critics who had focused on her personal controversies began acknowledging her genuine achievements in arts patronage and her role in modernizing royal approaches to public engagement. Margaret's death on February 9, 2002, following a final stroke, concluded a life marked by both significant achievements and personal struggles. Her funeral, held privately at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, reflected her family's desire to emphasize personal relationships over public ceremony, though the service attracted international attention as a symbol of an era's conclusion. Princess Margaret's legacy extends beyond her personal story to encompass broader questions about royal duty, individual freedom, and the monarchy's adaptation to modern social conditions. Her life illustrated the tensions between constitutional requirements and personal desires that affect all members of royal families, though few face these conflicts as publicly or dramatically. Her decision to renounce marriage to Peter Townsend established important precedents for subsequent royal romantic crises. The sacrifice demonstrated that constitutional duty could supersede personal happiness, reinforcing the monarchy's commitment to institutional stability over individual preferences. This example influenced later generations' approaches to similar situations. Margaret's children, David Armstrong Jones, now Earl of Snowdon, and Lady Sarah Chatto, inherited their mother's artistic interests while avoiding the constitutional pressures that affected her life. Both pursued creative careers, David in furniture design and Sarah in painting, while maintaining appropriate relationships with the royal family without seeking prominent public roles. The Earl's work in furniture design and restoration demonstrated the practical application of artistic training Margaret had encouraged. His success in professional contexts outside royal duties suggested that Margaret's emphasis on creative development had produced lasting benefits for her family. Lady Sarah's career as a professional painter reflected similar influences, with her work exhibited and sold based on artistic merit rather than royal connections. Her ability to maintain privacy while pursuing professional artistic achievement demonstrated that Margaret's approach to balancing royal heritage with individual development could produce successful outcomes. Margaret's grandchildren have continued this pattern of maintaining royal connections while pursuing independent careers. Their relative privacy and professional success suggest that the princess's emphasis on individual development and artistic appreciation created lasting family benefits despite her own personal struggles. The cultural impact of Margaret's life extended beyond immediate family to influence broader perceptions of royal duty and individual freedom. Her willingness to challenge conventions while ultimately accepting constitutional limitations demonstrated both the monarchy's flexibility and its essential constraints. Margaret's patronage of arts organizations established precedents for active royal involvement in cultural development that continue to influence contemporary practice. Her genuine expertise and hands-on approach showed how royal patrons could provide substantive rather than merely ceremonial support for important institutions. The media coverage of Margaret's life created templates for royal celebrity that affected subsequent generations. Her experience of intense scrutiny, particularly during the Townsend affair, established both positive and negative precedents for royal media relationships that continue to influence contemporary coverage of royal private lives. Contemporary portrayals of Margaret in films, television series, and biographical works continue to fascinate audiences interested in the intersection of duty, celebrity, and personal freedom. These depictions, while varying in accuracy, demonstrate enduring public interest in her story and its broader implications for understanding modern monarchy. Margaret's life ultimately illustrated both the possibilities and limitations of royal existence in democratic societies. Her genuine talents, personal warmth, and cultural contributions demonstrated positive aspects of royal privilege when directed toward public service. However, her struggles with media attention, constitutional constraints, and personal relationships revealed the costs associated with royal status in contemporary conditions. The contrast between Margaret's path and Elizabeth's demonstrates how different personalities could navigate similar constitutional frameworks with varying degrees of success. While Elizabeth's methodical approach to duty produced institutional stability and personal satisfaction, Margaret's more emotional and individualistic temperament created both remarkable achievements and significant difficulties. From King George VI's perspective, both daughters fulfilled essential aspects of his hopes for the monarchy's future. Elizabeth provided the constitutional leadership and personal dedication necessary for institutional continuity, while Margaret demonstrated the monarchy's human dimension and cultural relevance. Together, they showed how one family could embody both tradition and adaptation in serving constitutional democracy. The death of King George VI on February 6, 1952, marked more than the end of a reign. It initiated a transformation of the British monarchy that would extend far beyond anyone's expectations at the time. His two daughters, inheriting different aspects of his character and facing distinct challenges, would spend the next 7 decades proving that reluctant monarchs could indeed create lasting legacies. George VI never sought the throne, accepting it only when constitutional crisis demanded his service. This reluctant acceptance shaped his approach to kingship, emphasizing duty over privilege and service over ceremony. These values, transmitted to his daughters through example rather than formal instruction, would guide both Elizabeth and Margaret throughout their lives, though expressed through very different personalities and circumstances. The transformation began immediately after George VI's death. Elizabeth II's accession brought youth, energy, and adaptability to an institution that had weathered World War and imperial dissolution. Her approach to constitutional monarchy, learned at her father's side during his most challenging years, emphasized stability, neutrality, and gradual adaptation to changing social conditions. This methodical approach would prove essential as Britain navigated decolonization, economic challenges, and social revolution over the following decades. Margaret's parallel story demonstrated how the same family values could produce different but equally significant contributions. Her sacrifice in the Townsend affair proved that personal happiness remained subordinate to constitutional duty, reinforcing principles that George VI had accepted when he abandoned his comfortable life as Duke of York. Her subsequent career in arts patronage and cultural diplomacy showed how royal status could support creative endeavors and international understanding. The Commonwealth transformation from empire to voluntary association represented perhaps George VI's most significant indirect legacy. His personal relationships with Commonwealth leaders during decolonization, his understanding of democratic principles, and his commitment to peaceful transition influenced Elizabeth II's approach to these complex relationships. Her success in maintaining Commonwealth unity while respecting national sovereignty fulfilled aspirations that George VI had expressed but died too soon to implement fully. By the 21st century, the institutional changes initiated during George VI's reign had produced a fundamentally different monarchy. Elizabeth II's approach to constitutional questions, media relations, and public engagement reflected lessons learned during her father's difficult adjustment to kingship. Her ability to maintain dignity while accepting criticism, to adapt protocols while preserving essential functions, and to serve controversial governments while maintaining personal neutrality demonstrated the practical application of her father's theoretical understanding of constitutional monarchy. The Commonwealth relationships that George VI began to develop during decolonization have evolved into perhaps the monarchy's most significant contemporary relevance. Elizabeth II's personal connections with Commonwealth leaders, her understanding of diverse cultural contexts, and her commitment to peaceful development created networks of cooperation that extend far beyond former imperial relationships. These connections, maintained through decades of careful diplomacy, represent practical applications of the service ideal that motivated George VI's acceptance of unwanted responsibility. The current generation of royals, led by King Charles III, inherited not just titles but also methods and principles developed over 7 decades of Elizabethan innovation. Charles III's accession speech explicitly acknowledged continuity with his mother's approach while recognizing different contemporary challenges. His environmental activism, architectural interests, and social concerns reflected the engaged but non-partisan approach that Elizabeth II had developed during her long reign. Prince William and Prince Harry, despite their different current circumstances, both absorbed lessons about royal duty and public service that trace back to George VI's example. Their military service, charitable work, and commitment to causes beyond ceremonial requirements demonstrated the continuing influence of the service ethic that had guided their family since 1936. Margaret's descendants, though outside direct succession, continued to embody artistic and cultural interests that enriched the monarchy's broader contribution to British life. David Armstrong Jones and Sarah Chatto's professional achievements in design and painting, respectively, showed how royal heritage could support creative endeavor without compromising constitutional principles or individual achievement. The global response to Elizabeth II's death in 2022 validated the approach to monarchy that had evolved from George VI's reluctant acceptance of duty. The unprecedented public participation in mourning rituals, international tributes from world leaders, and genuine expressions of loss from ordinary citizens demonstrated that constitutional monarchy retained relevance and emotional resonance despite social change and institutional criticism. The stability of Charles III's accession proved that the constitutional mechanisms George VI had helped preserve continued to function effectively. The smooth transition, maintained ceremonial traditions, and broad public acceptance confirmed that personal dedication could indeed create lasting institutional strength. Looking forward, the monarchy that George VI's descendants will pass to future generations bears little resemblance to the institution he inherited in 1936. The imperial crown has become a Commonwealth symbol. The divine right of kings has evolved into democratic constitutional service. Royal privilege has been balanced by public accountability, and hereditary authority has been justified through personal dedication rather than birthright alone. This transformation succeeded because George VI's accidental preparation for kingship taught him that constitutional monarchy required adaptation without abandonment of essential principles. His daughters absorbed this lesson and spent their lives demonstrating its practical application. Elizabeth II showed how traditional institutions could remain relevant through genuine service and gradual modernization. Margaret proved that royal sacrifice for constitutional principles could coexist with individual development and cultural contribution. The challenges facing contemporary monarchy, media scrutiny, social change, economic pressure, and international complexity echo those that George VI confronted during his 16-year reign. His response emphasized personal duty, constitutional propriety, and gradual adaptation rather than dramatic gesture or ideological commitment. These approaches, refined and developed by Elizabeth Lydia over 70 years, continue to guide royal responses to contemporary challenges. The charitable and cultural work that both Elizabeth II and Margaret undertook throughout their lives demonstrated how royal status could support worthy causes without compromising constitutional neutrality. Their combined patronages encompassed education, healthcare, arts, international development, and countless local organizations that benefited from royal attention and support. This tradition of service, begun during George VI's reign and expanded by his daughters, continues to justify royal privilege through practical contribution to social welfare. The media relationships that proved so challenging for Margaret and occasionally difficult for Elizabeth II reflected the democratic accountability that George VI had recognized as essential for constitutional monarchy's survival. While royal privacy deserved respect, public interest in royal behavior was legitimate given the Crown's constitutional role in public funding. The balance between these competing demands required constant adjustment, but both sisters demonstrated that respectful engagement with media scrutiny could coexist with appropriate dignity and privacy protection. The religious dimension of monarchy, central to George VI's understanding of his role, continued to influence his daughters' approaches to their duties. Elizabeth II's coronation oath, her regular church attendance, and her understanding of royal service as religious vocation reflected her father's deep faith and sense of divine responsibility. Even Margaret, despite her more secular lifestyle, understood royal duty as involving service to others and contribution to social welfare, rather than merely ceremonial performance. The international impact of George VI's line extended far beyond Commonwealth relationships to encompass global diplomacy, cultural exchange, and charitable work. Elizabeth II's state visits, Margaret's cultural missions, and their combined charitable activities created networks of goodwill and cooperation that enhanced Britain's international influence while supporting causes of universal human benefit. The constitutional precedents established during Elizabeth II's reign, political neutrality, gradual modernization, personal accessibility, and institutional stability, provide frameworks for future royal service that reflect George VI's original vision while adapting to contemporary conditions. These precedents, tested by 7 decades of social change and political upheaval, offer guidance for maintaining constitutional monarchy's relevance in democratic societies. From 1952 to 2022, the question, "Whatever happened to George VI's children?" was answered through daily demonstration of inherited values applied to changing circumstances. Elizabeth became the embodiment of constitutional duty, showing how personal dedication could maintain institutional relevance across generations of social transformation. Margaret proved that royal sacrifice could coexist with individual development, that constitutional propriety did not require personal diminishment, and that cultural contribution could justify royal privilege. Together, they fulfilled their father's hope that his family would serve the crown and country with dedication, integrity, and adaptability. They proved that reluctant monarchy could produce lasting achievement, that constitutional service could adapt to democratic expectations, and that personal sacrifice could create institutional strength. The monarchy that King Charles III inherited in 2022 reflected 7 decades of careful development based on principles that George VI had established during his own reluctant but ultimately successful reign. The stability of succession, the continued relevance of royal service, the successful balance between tradition and modernization, and the enduring public affection for the institution validated the approach to constitutional monarchy that had evolved from one shy man's acceptance of unwanted duty. And that is what happened to King George VI's children. From the quiet king who never sought the throne came a line that reshaped the idea of British monarchy for the 21st century, proving that constitutional service, personal dedication, and gradual adaptation could maintain the relevance of hereditary institutions in democratic societies. Their legacy continues in the service of their descendants, the institutions they strengthened, and the example they provided of duty fulfilled across decades of unprecedented change.